Disclaimer, this is work in progress, okay? The dimensions and text type labels are provisional, and please, please, please help us get better labels and get a better interpretation of the things we're looking at, all right? So the International Corpus of Learner English is, as you know, project headed by Sylviane Granger, Magali Pacquiao, Maite Dupont, Fanny Munier, and it includes project teams from from different L1 backgrounds, and they get these cool names. So they get subcorporate names Swickle, all right, or Frickle or Brickle, all right. And so this corpus got started in the 90s. So there are 3 different versions. Version 1 released in 2002, 2 in 2009, both on CD-ROM. And now the latest one, version 3, it's online access, and you can go to that URL to check out the corpus. A wonderful resource. And here's a big thank you. So first of all, a big thank you to the International Corpus of Learner English headquarters for accepting our bid to collect Brickle. All right, so Brickle was a challenge. I mean, I could not have imagined it would take the best part of 20 years to collect this corpus. Yeah, you heard it. So 20 years, more or less. So of course we started and stopped, and we had no funding. So all of these things made things much harder, but I would not have imagined that it would be so hard, because I thought, and everybody thought, well, all these people learning English everywhere, and they're writing all these compositions. I'm going to just knock on the doors and say, give me some of those. And people say, here they are. And then, in 2 weeks we'd be done. But no, it took us a really, really long time. And thank you so much to our team for being out there and helping us collect the corpus. So the corpus, the ICLE corpus includes all these really interesting learner variables and task variables. So you can, you know where each composition is coming from in terms of a national subcorpus, also where the institution that the students were in, also the type of essay, their native language, gender, age, proficiency. So the learning, the time they have, how long they have been learners of English, also topic of essay, all these things, all right? The students were prompted to write on a particular topic and to produce an argumentative essay. Here are some of the essay topic choices. So for instance, this one, some people say that in our modern world dominated by science, technology, blah, 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 there's no longer place for dreaming. What is your opinion? So this is one topic. And this one was the topic number 1. So 18 of the 25 national subcorporate chose that one. And so most of those were in the Bulgarian subcorpus, all right? So you had these topics, and so the goals here, what are the goals for this particular research? So we want to describe the ICLE corpus version 3 so as to understand the argumentative learner writing from a text linguistic perspective. So we want to identify the underlying parameters of variation, the dimensions in these higher, intermediate to advanced level argumentative student writing in English. So the specific goals identify the dimensional characteristics of the ICLE essays in comparison to other argumentative registers, to identify the dimensional characteristics of the ICLE essays by determining their own set of dimensions of variation, and compare the essays along the dimensions, and then determine the amount of variation captured by the learner variables and task variables, and also derive the linguistic typology, text typology of those essays. Here are some of the questions. How similar are the essays to other argumentative registers? And number 2, What are the dimensions of variation for the equal essays? How do the texts vary with respect to the dimensions? What are the essay types? And how are the texts distributed across the essay types? Okay, multidimensional analysis was introduced by Doug Berber in the mid-80s. It seeks to describe the fundamental parameters of textual variation. A linguistic dimension is determined on the basis of consistent co-occurrence pattern. All right, so it's a set of features that co-occur across texts. So the parameters, these are the parameters that define continuums of variation rather than poles. So we have a whole line of variation to look at. So each dimension comprises an independent group of co-occurring linguistic features that are interpreted in functional terms. So that is very important. So we don't interpret the linguistic features linguistically, we interpret them in terms of what they do in the language, all right? So that's why that's in bold. So co-occurrence reflects shared function, all right? So there have been a few MD analysis of learner corpora. Here are some of them. If you know more, please let me know. As you know, most of them are looking at English compositions. Some are in Spanish, and all but one are in written learner language, just one in spoken. So how about the text typologies? Zilch, zero, nada, none, so far as we're aware. But if you know of any MD text typology, please let us know. So here's the corpus, an overview of the corpus. So 9,500 texts, over 5 million words. Okay, so the corpus is divided up in 25 national subcorpora, but I split up the Chinese subcorpora corpus into two. So there's mainland China and UK, Hong Kong. So Hong Kong and mainland. Also the Dutch one, I split it up between Netherlands and Belgium. That's why we have 27 instead of the 25. Average text size 602. So these are kind of, longish compositions. So here's how they break up in terms of the regional subcorpus. So Hong Kong has by far the largest number of compositions, then the Swana, then Greece, then Germany, Hungary, Brazil, Lithuania. By the way, all these codes are in your handout, all right? So if you want to have a look at your handout to, know what these mean, please do so. Also, per native language. So Cantonese, number one, then Swana, number two, then Swedish, then it flattens up. So basically the same numbers, except then you have those minority ones, as you can see over on this side. Per country, so most texts come from China, as you can see. Then Belgium, Greece, Hungary, Brazil, Lithuania, Italy, all right. Per gender, okay, so most texts were written by students who identified as females, so by far, right? Then by age, most students were at the tender ages of 20 to 22, all right? At the time, remember, some of these texts were collected 20 years ago, so by now, many of those folks are here at the tender age of middle age, whatever that's called, 40. Nice, okay, good. So they're young, or they were young. How many years? Most of them had been studying English for 6 years. Okay, essay types. So they were asked to write an argumentative essay. So by far, most of them did. But some wrote literary essays and other essays. So these other essays are intriguing. So I had a look. So there are 200 of those, but all but 2 are found in the Italian component, and 82% are from a single institution. And when you look at what they wrote about, the topics are the same as those for the argumentative essays. So it's a bit, we have to look more closely to see what's happening. So should we lump those with the argumentative ones? We don't know so far, but we kept this category as is, okay? So in terms of timing, no, most were not timed. So the students had, didn't have to worry about how long it took them to write the compositions. In terms of whether they used reference works, it's about it's even split more or less. Okay, so half did, half more or less, half did not. Were the essays part of an exam? So most of them, no, they were not part of an exam. In terms of the proficiency level, all right, so the learners were not, did not take any proficiency level tests, so they were classified as higher, intermediate to advanced by the people collecting the corpora, but Sylviane Granger and the team, they provided this, they had someone look at 20 texts for each subcorpus and then grade the essays in terms of proficiency levels, B2, C1, and C2. So this is just a sample. So you have, just some idea of the level of these students, but bear in mind, again, this is for a small sample. So as you can see, there is a large amount of variation across the national subcorpora. So China has the most B2 texts, whereas Sweden has the highest number of advanced texts. So, and then it varies across, okay? Okay, so here's a summary. So most texts were argumentative, written by students who had been learners for 6 years or more. They're female, aged between 19 and 23, had been studying English at the university for 2 to 4 years, never been in an L1 country. Those are not part of an exam. Texts were not timed, and it's a coin toss for reference aid, all right? So these are the basic traits. Okay, so here we go. First analysis and additive analysis. So the research question is, how similar are the essays to the other argumentative registers out there in the world? And we're using the 5 dimensions of variation for English from Berber 88. So here's a corpus we collected. So we built this specialized corpus with 100 ICLE essays. These were picked at random. Then I chose 100 editorials, press editorials from 𝗂𝗂𝗏 and the now corpora. Also 100 reviews from 𝗂𝗏 and the now corpus, and 100 radio analyses. All right, so these are spoken, and these were taken from 𝗂𝗏. So we have these 4 argumentative registers, right? So what happens? But what other argumentative registers would you guys have picked? What other registers could we look at to compare with the 𝗂𝗏 corpus? Let us know. Thank you ahead. So just so you have an idea what's there. So for press editorials, you have things such as from the Detroit News newspaper, distrust of schools should boost reform. And from the Columbus Dispatch newspaper, all's not fair in future uses of state land. For radio, these are from National Public Radio, NPR, Talk of the Nation program. So things such as the future of civil rights organizations, also from All Things Considered study, alcohol advertising increases drinking. So as you can see, some of these titles could have perfectly been 𝗂𝗏 titles. So they're really arguing a point here. So here are the findings. So, okay, for dimension 1, which is involved versus informational production. So the editorials have a very negative score, meaning they're informational. So the editorials are informational. The 𝗂𝗏 essays are sort of in the middle, but don't let that fool you, because when we looked at the essays, what happens is the essays had a mixture of both involved and informational features. So when you calculate a score, those cancel each other out, and therefore you have a score that's close to 0. But these are not neutral, so they have both features of both involved and informational. And the reviews, they're very informational, and the radio programs are also informational. So as you can see, 𝗂𝗏 sticks out. So 𝗂𝗏 is a little different. With respect to narrative, all of them are very similar. So all of these are non-narrative, as we would expect, right? With respect to the reference, are these explicit or situation dependent? So editorials and 𝗂𝗏 essays are really explicit, meaning they will mention what their references. So they will say things such as at the university in Australia, in this country, rather than say here, now, you know. So they're very, very explicit. Whereas reviews in radio are not. So here 𝗂𝗏 is siding with the editorials. With respect to persuasion, so the 𝗂𝗏 essays are a little bit more persuasive than the other ones. And in terms of abstraction, the 𝗂𝗏 essays are much more abstract, all right, than the other registers. So this, if you look at the yellow bars, except for here, you'll see the 𝗂𝗏 essays have a distinct profile, right? So what did we do? So we ran a discriminant function analysis in trying to have the computer assign the text to those categories. So we wanted to see if the computer could distinguish the 𝗂𝗏 text from these other registers, all right? So could an 𝗂𝗏 text be confused with an editorial or a review or a radio program, all right? And the other way around. So how do you do this? So you get your corpus, you get your dimension scores, and the computer will produce models. And for each model, it will remove the text that's under analysis, and that text will be classified according to the model in terms of these categories. So our categories are the register categories, right? So you get, for instance, an 𝗂𝗏 text here, and suppose it's classified as a 𝗂𝗏 essay. So this is the text was classified correctly. Suppose the 𝗂𝗏 text gets classified as a radio program, then the classification is not correct. So you average those out and you compare that to a baseline to see what happened. All right, so here's the results. So on this side where the text came from, and here's where they were classified. So editorials were 77% classified as editorials, right? But 11 were classified as ICLE essays. And also 11 were classified as reviews and 3 as radio programs. So what you want to look at is this diagonal to see, first of all, how many were classified as their correct categories. So ICLE essays, 58% were classified as ICLE and nothing else. 62 for review and 65 for radio. So that means if you compare those, the ICLE essays are more, what might you call this? More hybrid, all right? So compared to the other ones, so ICLE is sort of looks more like other argumentative registers. So here are some examples. I don't have the time really to look. So if you could just go to your slides and have a look, but here's some. So here's an ICLE essay, German text, talk about a friend and that this guy met, and they went around Madrid and the car broke down. And so what happened? So this one was classified as, any ideas? As a radio analysis program. Not this particular one, because we don't know, these are not classified one-to-one, but in terms of the register. So if you read this, you see it has a similar feel to it, and then the linguistic features are pretty much the same. So I'm sorry, I'm just jumping through because what did we find? All right, overall, the essays have distinctive dimensional characteristics that set them apart from non-school argumentative registers. And overall, the essays are more involved, more persuasive, and more abstract than these other quote-unquote real-world registers. Although some fit the dimensional profile of these other registers, the majority of the ICLE essays are just ICLE essays. All right, so the students were asked to produce a school text, so they did most of the case, most of the time. So go ahead, people, just help us. So these EFL argumentative essays seem to be very similar to each other, despite all the potential for variation. So we have different L1 backgrounds, different topics, different cultural norms, different instruction methods and things like that. So how come they look similar? Why do you think that is? It's if you think this is an interesting question, could you jump ahead and go to the chat? Let us know. So here's, let's go to part 2. And then we conducted this full MD analysis. Here, we want to find out the dimensions of variation for the ICLE essays. So we're not looking at those dimensions from general English that were determined by Berber. And so how do you do this? So first you tag the corpus up. So we use the Berber tagger, then you norm the count, select the features. So you run these factor analyses, all right? And then you get the factor scores and you look at the text. So this is not just about numbers. So you have to get down and look at the text carefully in order to understand what's happening here. Then at the end, you come up with these pretty nice dimension labels. So these are the end result, but then these dimension labels pack a lot of information, all right? So let's see. So how much variation did we account for? We accounted for around 45%, which is a good chunk. It might not look like much, but in terms of MD analysis, this is pretty good. And the factors are not, there's some correlation between them, but they're pretty independent, I would say. So the first one we're calling objective fact-based exposition. So you have these features here. So long words, lots of adjectives in attributive position. So that's funny because this set of features normally co-occur with adjectives not in attributive position, but in predicative position. But here, they are in attributive. So you have these nouns, prepositions, passives, and these create the conditions for students to give these fact-based expositions very objective, all right? And here's an example. Here's text from Hungary. If you read this, you'll see there's lots and lots of information and about the Hungarian tertiary education system, and there's a lack of sufficient practical knowledge and so on and so forth. Here's one from Hong Kong. So the student is talking about recycling and the relationship of recycling to pollution and the landfills and waste management, things like that. Yeah. And then as opposed to that, you have these subjective involved expression dimension, which is very different. So you get all of these mental verbs, the present tense verbs, the first, second, third person pronouns, also coordinating conjunctions, WH clauses. All of these give the students the tools they need in order to express subjectivity and to get involved with their interlocutors. So here's an example from Japan. The student is saying, well, I don't know what to do with my life. I can't make plans. I don't know where I'm going, if I want to get married. So people say this, people say that. So this is very subjective, all right? But they are arguing a point, okay? This one from Serbia. So the books are important to this person. And so they read books and what do books mean to them? And so again, it's subjective perspective, all right? So how do the registers vary? So the Hungarian texts are very, very objective based, whereas the Japanese and Serbian ones are very subjective, okay? It's a very big difference. 22% of variation accounted for native language. I'm going to skip these for time being because you can look at those in your handouts. So now if we look at those task and learner variables in terms of the timing. So the timing did not affect the results at all, just 2%. There's no difference here. Essay types, just 0.3%. So that doesn't affect the results. Whether the texts were part of an exam or not, no effect, just, okay, no effect, small effect, okay. So, but it's interesting. So if the students are in an exam situation, they'll tend to write more objectively, but you know, again, small, there's lots of variation, but for genders, there's no difference between males and females. So for dimension 2, okay, dimension 2, we called evaluative opinion-based exposition. So there's lots of appraisal going on, and these are supported by these complement clauses. So that complement clauses, the stance clauses, lots of stance here, all right? So here's one example from Greece. So the student is saying, I think and I wish that someday the educational institutions will change. So they're arguing the point that something needs to change, but they're giving an evaluation, an appraisal of the situation based on their own opinion, all right? And here's one from, this one is from Greece as well. Is it the same text? Okay. So in terms of the breakdown, there's very little variation accounted for with respect to the origin of the text. So Japanese texts tend to be more evaluative, whereas the Pakistani and the German and Swana texts tend to be less evaluative, but there's lots of variation here. Now, in terms of the language, I'm going to skip those. Please look at your handouts. So in terms of timing, no difference at all. So in terms of the essay types, no difference at all. In terms of the exam conditions, no difference at all. In terms of the gender, no difference at all. So here's a mixed model. All right, so we have all of these influences. We have the title of the topic of the composition, institution, essay type. Here it gets more interesting. So for dimension one, remember dimension one is objective versus involved. So objective versus personalized. So what you have is for the title plays a big role in terms of whether students are going to write more objectively or more personalized in a more personalized way. For dimension one, 17% of the variations accounted for that. Then the institution, you know, the school where they are at, that influences that quite a bit. All these other factors, not very much. And here's the national subcorpus, so okay, 22%. But there's about 70% of variation left unaccounted for. All right, so there's lots of variation not accounted for with this model. With dimension two, title accounts for 10%, much less for institution, and then essay type. So you see the dimensions are different. So when the students are writing, they're choosing, right, whether to write a more objective or more personalized subjective way. So that is influenced in different ways. So topic will influence the school system where they're at in, will influence more this dimension than whether they will write in a more evaluative appraisal. So, okay. Summary, 2 dimensions underlie the variation across the text: objective, fact-based exposition versus this personalized, involved expression. And the second dimension is this evaluative, appraisal-based, opinion-based exposition. So the variation is partially accounted for by where the students are, what they're writing about, and the essay types. Okay, so let us know. So it's hard to predict, all right, the variation across the essays based on these learner and task variables. So what variables do you think are driving the variation? What other variables could we look at? All right, give us your opinion. Go to the chat, please. We do appreciate that very much. We do appreciate your feedback. Okay, what other variables? So where is this variation coming from? All right. All right, so part 3, text typology. Okay, this is a marathon, right? So here we go, text typology. This is very exciting. So Longacre said back in the 80s, so determinative of detail is the general design of a discourse type that the linguist who ignores discourse types can only come to grief. So we don't want to come to grief. So let's pay attention to text typologies. They are very important. So the research questions: what are the essay types in this corpus? What are the texts? How are these texts distributed across the essay types? So MD text typology. So the text typology based on an MD analysis defines text types as groupings of texts. They're similar in their linguistic form. So this is very important. So we're talking about linguistic text types. So we're not talking about situational text types. So those are registers. We're looking at strictly linguistic form, right? And we use cluster analysis to get to those text types. Okay, so there have been, you know, some text typologies from an MD perspective, but not very many. So people do not take the extra step toward the text typologies. For some reason, people are scared to carry out text typologies. I think they're fun. So I've been involved, you know, doing a few of those. So 𝗷𝗂𝗍𝗏 introduced that, and he produced this a cornerstone one, which is the text typology for English, based on 8 types. Then for Somali, and here's the one I came up with for Brazilian Portuguese with 9 text types. My friend 𝗬𝗍𝗫 𝗬𝗏, we came up with this one for article sections with 2 text types. And Marcia Verano and myself, who have looked at American television, we came up with the text typology of 9 TV text types. So this is fun. This is exciting. Why don't more people do this? I don't know. So how do we do this? We look at the dimension score. So you need a pre-existing MD analysis, right? That's where you start from. And you do the cluster analysis, then you assign the text to cluster. So unlike an MD analysis, each text goes to a single bin. So you don't get this multi-dimensional perspective. So each text goes into a single category, into a single text type. So, so how do you do this? So we look at different statistics, for example, cubic clustering criterion to determine the number of text types in the data. So for this one, we look at peaks. So here's a peak. So this is a nice peak. And that signals 4 clusters. So that means 4 potential text types, but these are negative values for the CCC, meaning those clusters are not well separated. So there's a lot of overlap, all right? So, okay, so 4 text types. So what are those? So we have text type 1, which we call subjective exposition with some critical appraisal. Text type 2, subjective exposition. Text type 3, fact-based account with subjective positioning. And last one, objective fact-based exposition, all right? In terms of the size of those, in terms of the number of texts that are classified into each one, as you can see, the default type is number 3. So most ICLE essays are fact-based accounts with some subjective positioning. Secondly, then there's this objective, this hardcore objective. I'm going to give you the facts, and here are the facts kind of text, all right? The minority one is subjective exposition. For some reason, then when you ask students to write an argumentative text, they will not think of expressing themselves subjectively and giving a critical appraisal, all right? So here's the scores. So for this subjective, this goes from subjective to objective, all right? So the subjective cluster 1 has this scores. So some, it's very negative on dimension 1, and it's well, it's just above 0 for dimension 2. Then cluster 2 is less negative on 1. Then there's this is dropping for dimension 2. As you can see, those 2 go in different directions. So cluster 2 captures this sort of mixture of subjective with more appraisal, which is yeah, it makes sense, right? So you're more subjective and you're also giving more appraisal. Whereas this one is really hardcore fact-based objective stuff with no appraisal, all right? So here's an example. We don't have the time, but you can look at those in your handout. This is a Brazilian text. So there's subjective exposition with some critical appraisal, right? Here's one that's from Greece, very subjective. So we don't have the time, unfortunately. And here's type 3. Okay, here, type 3 is your main type. Okay, most texts are like this. They're fact-based, but with some subjective positioning. And here's the colors, so you can see all of these features in blue will enable the student to give the objective information. Then these ones in red will be the ones providing the subjective linguistic features, and here in orange, the evaluative. So this syndrome of features, creates this fact-based type with some subjective position, which is the main type. But also this is the objective type. If you read this, you'll see it's just information. No subjectivity, all right? And here are the features that enable this, all right? So now, join in the conversation, please. Can you predict the distribution of the national varieties across the types? And can you predict the national groups with respect to the types? Which ones would prefer a more objective style? Which ones would favor a more subjective style? Can you take a guess, guys? All right, here we go. So cluster 1, all right, subjective exposition. Yeah, it's preferred by the Japanese. So most of the texts in this text type are from the Japanese subcorpus, also from the Serbian one, and Norway and Swana. That's interesting. I would never predict that. So how come, all right? Does anyone have an explanation out there? Are you watching? Are you from Japan? Do you have any theories about that, or from Serbia or Norway? Let us know. Okay, the subjective one, again, most of the texts there are from Japan, but also Czech, Sweden, German, and the Belgian texts. Okay, now we're moving to the objective one. Then you get the Dutch ones, all right? So you see a big difference, right? Whereas the people in Belgium seem to prefer the subjective exposition a little bit more than their counterparts in the Netherlands. So that's interesting. So we don't know what that means. Okay, so, and cluster 4 is this hardcore one, right? The objective one. That is preferred by the Hungarian students, the Hong Kong students, Pakistani, and the Polish ones, the Lithuanian. So how come? What's happening here? Do you have any ideas? Or do you know? Do you have any expectations? Why is this happening? Is there an explanation? Is it just random? Let us know. What do you think? So then to simplify matters, I just summed up the counts for clusters 1 and 2 into this subjective count. And then I summed up the percentages for 3 and 4 subjective as an objective count. As you can see, a snapshot here for Japan, 68% of the texts are subjective and 31% objective. And this is the reverse picture for Hong Kong texts, all right? So 95% are very objective. Hungary, 95%, also very objective. And the Dutch from the Netherlands, also very objective. So very different poles here. Here's a graph showing that. These are mirror images. That's why the line's going this way and that way, the same way. So as you can see, so the subjective essays are not the main ones. So there's some preference here, but for most of the time, most texts are here toward the objective, right? And More subjective styles, so Japan, Serbia, Norway, Botswana, Czech Republic. So they have a shape like this. So as you can see, very similar shapes, all right, for Japan, Serbia. Subjective with some objectivity. So the Belgian text, Turkey, and Sweden, so they have a shape that's like that, all right? So they're here, but then, so they fall into the 2 and 3 text types, most of them. Here's an example, right? So we don't have the time, but it's interesting to see how the student mixes up the subjective language choices with the objective language choices. So the subjective ones are in red, all of these features that enable you to interact and provide your own opinion. And here in blue, the ones that provide the means for you to be more objective and fact-based and informational. All right, so the objective style is this default style, all right? So you see a whole lot of countries that prefer this one: Bulgaria, Finland, Russia, Korea, Brazil, China. So they look like this. As you can see, not much difference. So here's for Bulgaria, here's from Finland, here's from Russia, here's from Brazil. It's pretty much the same. So, and China. And last of all, the very objective one, as you know, Hungary, Hong Kong, Pakistan, and Dutch from Netherlands. So they look like this. As you can see, it spikes up for cluster 4, cluster 3 is a decent size as well. So here we go, look at that. So guys, here's our final milestone. 4 types we found: subjective exposition with some critical appraisal. Number 2, subjective exposition. Number 3, fact-based account with some subjective positioning. Number 4, very objective, all right? Most varieties prefer 3 and 4, and few prefer a more subjective style. So thank you guys, woohoo, we got this far, woo. A drink of water. All right, thank you, you guys are amazing. Thank you for watching. So thank you for your valuable comments and insights. Do we have time for questions? I hope so.